Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Envoy of Kairos, back for another D&D Commissioned Speedpaint. And once again, we have my buddy Ghast on deck and waiting for another impressive piece of one of his characters. He's really been giving me a lot to work with, and so far I'm loving all of the characters he sends at me. A lot of them do tend to follow a general theme, but this one breaks away from it just a bit. Normally, his characters can be described as members of the Fun-Sized Mages Guild, but this time we have a half-elf, so he breaks away from that for a bit. Here I have for you Scryx Shorewalker. He was a member of the Safe Haven family, merchants and mages that owned an incredibly powerful and notable shipping company. They would transport wares all over the world across the most dangerous seas, and had very few things that were genuinely a threat to their empire. But that's not to say they had none. One of the biggest threats to their empire was their own bigotry, and it would come to a head with the life of Scryx. The family itself and those running the company were pure-blood elves, and very proud of that. So, when a half-elf bastard child was born, they did everything they could to disenfranchise him, eventually settling on framing him for conspiracy with dark forces, and having him banished from the family and their town. For years, he spent his days as a beach bum, wandering the shores, staring out upon the sea in rage, watching his family's ships sail by, and wishing for them all to sink. But eventually, Scryx grew tired of simply waiting and watching, knowing nothing would come of it. No, he needed to act. And if they were going to oust him from his rightful fortune by insisting upon conspiracy with dark forces, then why not actually take their advice and actually conspire with something that is a consistent threat to his family? And so, he sought out the assistance of an ancient kraken, one that had sunk many of their family's ships over the years, one of the very few beings capable of being a threat to their empire. And with that pact sealed, Scryx Safe Haven abandoned his family name and became Scryx Shorewalker, the fathomless warlock. Born a noble and now a conspirator against his own blood, and proudly announcing so to his party members, friends, allies, and any who may ask. Of course, having a kraken patron, and having spent a few years homeless, much of his gear is salvaged, light leather armor and robes, meant only to keep him going in the midst of battle, while his magic manages most of threats. Of course, this also means that having a kraken patron, he has a lot of shore-side and water-themed designs to him. Sandals strung together with coarse rope. A fur vest that is largely used by seafaring warriors and sailors that head to the northern waters and are exposed to much harsher conditions. Although he tends to stick to warmer climates himself, he finds that a bit of extra cold resistance is quite helpful when you're dealing with casting a lot of cold spells, thanks to your patron. The waters of the Kraken's deep tend to be quite icy, so those he conjures with his Eldritch Blast and many other spells granted by his patron tend to carry the same cold. But that's not to say he himself has a cold demeanor either. He's quite friendly with those he considers actually worthy of his time, those who don't judge him for being half-elf, or for his choice of patron. Any who see his goals of overthrowing a corrupt empire as something noble are sure to be treated kindly by him. Those who side with his family's empire, on the other hand, are sure to be struck down swiftly and eagerly. In regards to designing the actual piece, much of it was based on the character's Hero Forge icon, but I did do quite a bit of customization regardless. For one, the orb that is largely used to conjure his master's power is contained safely within some salvaged fishing net. Lighting and shading that net, especially with the light source being the orb itself, proves a little tricky, but I eventually figured it out. I had to cut a bit of time out of the recording process, where I tried multiple different methods of figuring that particular task out. The trickiest thing to design was his sword. That rapier had to have some Kraken elements built into it, and I went through a couple of different sketch drafts before I settled on something final. A guard largely shaped like a Kraken's skull plate, with a hand guard that largely resembles two tentacles, with encrusted suckers facing outwards. I did consider working a similar tentacle theme into the handle, but I realized the suckers carved into it would be a bit difficult and potentially painful to wield. It would just be a tad too awkward, so I simply spiraled it instead. The blade itself has an interestingly designed edge, and that's largely because I wanted to shape it like a Kraken's fins. They are quite large, long, sharp, and intimidating. Replicating the shape for the weapon of a Kraken patron warlock simply felt natural. In the end, I had quite a bit of fun figuring out the fine details of this character, although it did take quite some time to create a face that suited the description of a slightly deranged half-elf Tom Hiddleston. But I think I managed it quite well in the end. Ghast is definitely happy with it. And overall, this piece feels quite complete, especially with the dark, misty shore background, and the addition of his Kraken patron, lurking just over the sea in the distance, barely visible. But for now, this is yet another commission completed for Ghast. Another speed paint I'm quite happy to do, and very happy with the results of. Always glad to work with you, man. Well, this is the Envoy of Kairos signing out. And I'll see you all again in another 2 weeks for another speed paint. If somebody commissions me again, it'll be that. If not, I think I'm gonna do a tribute to an old favorite series that just reached an incredible peak last week.